You're very welcome to Tala Library. You're very welcome online as well. Thank you so much to everybody for joining us. I know it's that time of the evening. It's 7 o'clock, and if you have smaller children at home, you're trying to get everybody organised for baths and beds. It's up the stairs, it's down the stairs. The older ones are maybe doing homework, so I really appreciate you taking the time to join us online. And thank you so much to everybody who's joined us in Tala Library with Safe Food. My name is Suzanne Kane. I'm your host for this evening. I'm merely here to moderate and to maybe give a lot of my questions that I have. But I've been an ambassador for the Make a Start campaign because I got asked about it a couple of months ago. When you start to kind of look at the Make a Start campaign and what way it impacts in your life, I have a 2-year-old at home, I have a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old. So for us, it's bang on where we are. It's trying to wrestle those healthy eating habits, keeping them going and persevering when things kind of feel like, do you know what's easiest here for me is maybe just give them a chocolate bar and we can all move on. But it's trying to persevere with that. And then navigating being a parent, because it's never easy. No day is easy. I work full time. My husband works full time. I'm here this evening with you, which comes with childcare, which you all understand, and navigating all those things. So I think sometimes as parents we forget maybe to talk to each other or to even just give each other that look and go, I've got you, I see you, you're very visible to me. And then sometimes reaching out and asking the experts those questions, which leads me nicely into our experts for this evening. Aileen McGloin, Dr. Aileen McGloin, who is Head of Nutrition in Safe Food. You're very welcome this evening.
Thank you so much, Suzanne.
Thank you so much for joining us. And Dr. Colman Noctor, who's a child psychotherapist. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Do I call you Colman or do I call you Dr. Colman?
Colman, please, Colman, yeah.
Same with Aileen. Aileen, tell us a little bit about the campaign and about this evening for Safe Food.
Yeah, I just want to add to your welcome. Everybody is so welcome here at Tala Library. It's a privilege to be here. I want to welcome you on behalf of Safe Food and Libraries Ireland. We're going to talk about how we start making healthy changes, a little bit about the challenges that people face, and I'm sure you're all familiar with those, and then how you stick with that. We very much want this to be parent-led this evening, so to everybody in the room, please ask your questions. To everybody who's joining us online, you can put your questions up online as well, and Suzanne can receive them here at the table. So, it's all about answering the questions this evening.
Yeah, it's just about saying it out loud. I know sometimes when you're sitting in a room, and as we go along, you'll feel a little bit more comfortable and have those questions. And obviously, just in terms of we are online, and there's lots of people joining us online. You don't need to go into the finer details, but if there's a broader question, that's what we'd love to, rather than drilling down into, I know for me, I'd be like, I have a 2-year-old. They don't, but more just in terms of sleeping and routines and one thing and another. So are we happy enough to dive right in? But if at any point, by the way, pop up your hand. We'll get one of the guys from Safe Food will come and answer a question. Or if you're online, please feel free to jump on and enjoy the conversation, because that's what it is. It's not us talking at you guys. It is very much all of us having a lovely conversation together and supporting each other as parents and carers and guardians. So I think probably getting started, Aileen and Colman, one of the first things is, and I spoke about that Make a Start campaign. Everything is online on makeastart.ie. They can jump on there. But I think making healthy lifestyle changes as a parent, that sometimes you'll say, right, I need to get stuck into this, and come Monday morning we're going to start doing that. The very start of the easy steps of getting going is making the decision to do it. As I said, you can jump on to Make a Start, but then getting into the day-to-day living of managing that in your life. Yeah. What advice would you have for parents this evening with that?
Yeah, so you've hit the nail on the head there. The Start campaign is all about these small, manageable changes. So when we're talking about making changes, I think sometimes when we speak to parents, it's incredibly daunting. Like, how would I do that? But if you make a decision around this, the one thing that affects your family, so it could be that you want to switch out the sugary breakfast cereals, for something healthier, that you want to take the sugary drinks off the dinner table and switch to water, that you want to start working on the treats, but even just start with one treat-free day if you're having treats every day. So it's really about making, really breaking those changes down and deciding what you are going to do as a family, and then just keeping it small and manageable. There are other things you'll need to do then. There's a bit of planning. So if you're not having treats every day, you need something else. So you have to plan that into your shopping. You might need to get help from the other important adults in your child's life to bring them along to make sure everybody's on the same page.
Yeah, the Nana call, I call it. It's the, hiya, how's it going? I really appreciate it, but if you don't mind, can we not have a lot from Nana's Press today?
And I think sometimes if you frame that as asking for help, we've decided to do this as a family. We don't want to have treats on Monday or whatever it is. Can you help me with that? As opposed to don't, So sometimes it's about the language and the framing.
Yeah, that's right. And then, Colman, in terms of like starting that and getting the kids ready for that, and go, like I call it, like it is a marathon, but in the best possible way, because exactly as you said, it's like you're looking for the support around you, but also you can kind of turn around to the kids and go, jigs up, there's no, this morning we're not having that. So how do you frame that for kids, and or do you just say nothing? Like as a parent, do we say nothing and just make the swap? Or do you predispose them with that information and go, hey guys, as a family, we're going to make these healthier, or whatever those changes
It's
are?
probably somewhere in the middle. I mean, I don't think you overhype it, because it can sometimes then be... The biggest problem we make in changes is overcorrection. So we go from, sure, feck it, it's Christmas and we'll have everything to New Year's Eve. I'm going to be totally new tomorrow. I'm going to, eat nothing, and I'm going to drink water and everything else. So the idea is that when you make these extreme leaps into change, they get really, really hard really quickly, and you fail. And so you go back. So it's not about kind of just becoming Ireland's fittest family and never having a treat again. It's about trying to how to improve from where we are now. So it's not about being the best, it's just being better than we are now. So these small incremental changes, and that means it doesn't have to be a big announcement or a big plan. And the other thing we do is we make changes on a whim. So when we're really frustrated, we go, that's it. No treats ever again.
Is that not the way everybody does it? Is that not the way you do it?
Where you're kind of grounding a child for a year and a half or something, you know what I mean? You can't follow through on. The idea is that you don't make those changes when you're upset or frustrated or emotional. You make them when you're thinking it through. And the other thing is, what we know and what we do are very different things. We all know the stuff that we should and shouldn't be eating and doing, but knowledge is only a start of something. You have to actually make those changes. And people will always say, when I feel better, I'll do something different. Unfortunately, it's when you do something different, you feel better. And so the action has to lead the way in terms of how it is we feel about it. And so the only way of making something that's unfamiliar familiar is by repeating it.
Okay.
So.
And in that space as well of making changes, and then you're kind of just, they're happening maybe as the week is going along, and obviously whether you're the parent or the carer or the guardian in that that circumstance, you're saying, right, we're going to be the people, if it's two people co-parenting, you're parenting together, that you go, we're making this decision, and that you stay and stand firm on that within the house. But again, as you say, like New Year's resolutions, at the very start, we all come with great intention. But as the marathon continues and you start to wane, how do you stick at it? Because I think in the early part, when you're starting to make changes or changing foods in or taking foods out, it's kind of okay. But when they realise, that this is part and parcel of it and this is the way our household runs, there can be a bit of resistance to that change. Like, how do you not falter in that?
There's a few aspects to that. I suppose one is the circumstances that you create around that. So we talked about the planning. So the way that you shop, the house is not full of treats, if that's your particular goal. The treats are not accessible to the child, i.e. in a high press that they can't reach if they're there. Or you only buy them on the Friday or the Saturday, whenever you've decided that that's when you're doing it. So you kind of create an environment that supports the decision that you've made. So you make it easier for yourself, in effect. The motivation is probably the more difficult part of the thing. Everybody starts gung-ho as well, as Colman was saying, but then you have to kind of relax into that. So you just have to just stick with it at that point. Get all the adults around your child in support and everybody moving in the same direction. And I suppose the other thing to remember is you're not aiming for perfection. You probably will fall off the wagon somewhere.
Yeah.
A little bit of self-acceptance is also part of it. So, if you do, have the treats on the day you said you wouldn't, or bow to the child's requests or whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Next day, you just start again. So it is a little bit about trying, failing, trying again, but really sticking to that goal in your mind to say, this is what we want to happen. So we're just going to keep working on this. And remember, it's not going to happen overnight. It'll take at least 6 weeks to change a habit.
Okay.
So it is about that kind of making familiar, as Colman said earlier on, trying it again and again and again.
I thought there's some very interesting, you said, Aileen, there about parents, and I don't know about you guys, but it's that kind of moment where if something goes wrong, that you've said, this is what we're going to do, and then you're the grown-up, and then you falter. and then the guilt that comes with that. Like you said, it takes 6 weeks, but then allowing yourself as a parent to have that moment going, I'm not going to hit everything all of the time, but the intention is there.
And I think a really nice thing to do for yourself is to just be a bit gentle with yourself.
Yeah.
You know, this is a marathon, not a sprint. Like, these things are not going to happen overnight. So, you know, just kind of ease into it. You're trying, you're doing your best, you're aiming for something, and you will get there.
Yeah, and you will.
Yeah.
Like, you will get there, which is kind of part and parcel. There's so many questions that have come in. One of them, the questions, like, that kind of comes in with this is when you're talking about changes habits, one of the big ones that came in on Safe Food is about foods and trying new foods. These are just two general questions that we had in, but an 8-year-old who's very set in their ways won't try new foods, will only eat the thing that he's familiar with. Again, another one I struggle with, dinner time. My 2-year-old won't eat any vegetables, won't eat any meat. What can I do? So kind of the same scenario of one is very change resistant and the other, like, is change resistant in the sense of they will only eat what they eat. So from a nutrition standpoint, should we go with the kind of maybe the psychological first or the nutritional standpoint?
Yeah. You want me to go first?
You start with it, Aileen.
I suppose, look, again, this is part of the be gentle with yourself message. Neophobia, which means the fear of new things, is an absolutely normal part of a child's development. So it'll start about 1.5, you know, it'll kind of peak between 1.5 and about 5, but it won't finish really until close to 12 and even 18. So, I mean, this is an 18-year project. So I think parents have a great tendency to kind of beat themselves up if they're not getting a full portion of peas into the child or whatever it is. But this is a very slow process, and it's a very normal part of the human condition to be afraid of what you don't know. That's part of how we survive, and that's why the child is acting like this. So, I mean, for some children, it will be smelling, licking, biting and spitting out, taking one bite, and what I'm talking about is a many years process for some kids, and then you get your bite and you might get your 2 bites and 3 bites, and eventually by the age of 12 most children will be, you know, somewhere around accepting lots and lots of foods, which is great. So it's that kind of acceptance, I think, of the process as a very long one, and trying not to create a stressful situation out of at dinner. So your job is to expose the child to the food, make them more familiar, encourage them to try, but your job is not to get them to eat a full portion. You know, that is something you can consider as a very long-term goal. So I think when you put it in those kind of terms, it becomes a little bit more manageable for a parent, because they're not failing every dinner time, they're just trying every dinner time, and that is a little bit easier to manage.
Language.
Yeah.
It's very important language, I think, to use. And I think as a parent, we probably face that a lot of our parents saying we have, like, I know in our house we have a very small food group for one of our children, and, you know, everything is, and I think as a parent, when you see maybe one of your other children that are, you know, very accepting of food and sit up and eat that, number one, you just want them the enjoyment of, you know, and having that moment of sitting up enjoying food and it not being a challenge. But it does quickly can fall into, or you can as a parent fall into a trap of it becomes kind of almost tense even, you know, in the run-up to dinner time or in the run-up to even suggesting a new food. So is there a way to, you know, as a parent to kind of go reassure your child in that, or that it doesn't become a us versus them kind of situation?
I think the first thing to do is not see your child's diet as a reflection or extension of you, because then you get personalised into it and you have to get them finished.
I am a waffle, Colman. Walking waffle.
I suppose the issue is the fear of the unknown is what anxiety is. So if you don't know what something tastes like, the younger child will feel, I don't want to try that. And they'll have heard, you know, they'll have associations with broccoli or whatever it is, and it's dreadful and all that sort of stuff. So it's always about rewarding the effort, not the outcome. You know what I mean? So you reward a child trying, not completion. Do you know what I mean? And so once you get into that, and it is tiny in terms of moving it, but as a child matures, and many will, they'll find out how restrictive their diet is, and they'll want to be included in things at secondary school. And, you know, if someone's going down to get a roll at lunchtime or whatever the case may be, they'll start to broaden their palate around that time naturally, and so there is a bit of patience required in it. However, what I would say is avoid battles. The battle of the dinner table is as much about reinforcing that it's important to you as it is about getting the food into your child. And if it becomes a battle of wills, then food will become the source of that argument or that control.
Is it an age-old thing, Colman? Like you're saying that about that, but is it an age-old thing that we're predisposed to sit down, eat your dinner, you know, and that it's kind of almost like a parenting win? Like, is there something from our parents, do you think, that we kind of maybe carry with us, that it's a very focal thing that, you know, they must have their dinner in their belly, sit and eat your dinner, or that the reward comes after the dinner almost, that if you get through that, I'll give you, you know, a bar of chocolate, or I'll give you...
Yeah, I mean, our relationship with food is an emotional one from very early on. So the child who falls, you give them a treat. The child who's tired, you give them a treat. The child who's good gets a dessert. The child who's not. So all these associations with food are being hardwired right from the off. And so the idea of, and even, you know, things like my parents would have said to me, and there's starving children in Ethiopia and you're not finishing your dinners or whatever. And that creates guilt about leaving food or not completing food and all that sort of stuff. So we don't want to further enhance the emotional connection with performing at the meal time versus that. And that's where we start all the process of comfort eating and feeling we don't deserve to eat and all those sorts of things. So the less emotional you can make the meal time, certainly in terms of intensity, the better the outcome. Now, obviously, we want our children to have enough food, and we're worried about them not eating enough and everything else. And Aileen might be able to speak more to that. But if it becomes an absolute intense investment on behalf of the parent, that can sometimes hijack the nutritional piece, and it becomes an emotional battle. And children, you know, very small infants, the way they exert control is by not listening, not eating. And so those two communications are, I'm putting my foot down here. And the first, you know, words an infant will utter and overuse is no or never. You know, so it is about control, and don't make food a source of a battle of control.
Which leads us actually to a question, Aileen, from a nutritional standpoint. So two of the questions here that probably stand out for so many people here or for watching is, my son is 12, he won't eat anything other than bread. And the other one is that how do I get my 12-year-old to eat more vegetables? So they're very polarised in terms of one will only eat bread and the other one is trying to get the nutritional value in. So from a 12-year-old's perspective, obviously he's growing, and if he's only eating bread, I mean, I know there's always kind of this thing of like, sure, they won't starve, but also from a nutritional standpoint, I think that's always parents' real concern.
Yeah, and I would say the person who submitted that question is worried. So that child, particularly a boy, is going into a very large growth spurt at that particular time. Only bread is very restrictive, and I think we need to just acknowledge that there is a condition called ARFID, that's avoidant and restrictive food intake disorder. That was covered in the media this week. I don't know if people would have heard about that. And it's quite an extreme disorder of eating because, you know, the food is so limited. So we're not talking about the child that you can gradually, as I was saying, you know, gradually introduce the foods. These children will have it's a real physiological and sensory issue, sometimes associated with the neurodiversity spectrum, like autism, or sometimes, not always. And the parents who are experiencing this will know this very well. But it's just to acknowledge for everybody here that there is a condition that would need, you know, specialised care, whether dietetic or psychological, to help that child to maybe move forward. And they may not, so they may need medical intervention as well. So just to acknowledge that that is a condition.
Yeah, because it's quite, and it will just eat bread. Do you know that kind of, you kind of look at that and go, what are the factors that are around that bread? So
I could say to that parent, you know, try some of the things that I talked about, you know, all the senses, the licking, the smelling, the everything. But it sounds like if that has lasted until the child is 12, she may need to consult her GP and maybe look for extra care there.
Investigate a little bit further on that, 100%. And then, by the other side of that spectrum is, again, teenager, and in terms of more vegetables, because from parental side, from a nutrition standpoint, it's always that thing. Like I have a mad thing about looking at my kids' nails, like they're going to get scurvy. Do you know what I mean? Like, honestly, it's 2023, but I'm just like, or isn't it, you know, but like, it is that thing, we're just constantly going, are they having enough nutrition? And you go into the pharmacy, I'm like, well, I buy the jelly things, because that, you know, will give them sugar and some type of, you know, but trying to manage their actual intake as they grow, as a parent, are you looking at the 5 a day, or where are you looking at that?
That's what you're aiming for, but you know, one of the points that Colman said earlier was that you're starting from where you are. That's so if that child is only eating a limited range of vegetables, you start there. And one technique that might be useful is called food chaining. So, you know, if a child likes mashed potato, they might have some mashed carrot. You kind of follow the texture.
Yes.
Or if they like peas, they might like sweet corn because it's kind of similar, small, round, you know, vegetables. So it's that kind of, how do we build on what we already have, what's already acceptable to the child. And if they have the mashed carrot, you know, you might be looking and get a couple of whole carrot pieces in eventually. So follow the textures, follow the shapes, you know, follow what they'll already take and go with that. And that can be helpful as well.
Super helpful, definitely.
Yeah.
There's loads of questions in. One eats too much, the other eats too little.
That could be
That
okay.
could be across, but that could be across
Yeah.
the board in terms
Yeah.
of, is one having too many snacks? Is like
Yeah.
the word snack in the pandemic was a trigger word. It really is. It's just people looking at you go, can I have a snack all the time? And then again, because they were at home and you were worried about them. So it's in terms of, are they eating too much for dinner and the other one's not taking in enough?
So children, you know, are very capable of following their own appetites.
Yeah.
So sometimes as parents, you know, one of the things you said earlier was that, you know, a parent is always, you know, like kind of on tenterhooks, wondering will they eat the dinner, because that's a natural instinct. And of course, you know, every parent knows that's really what we want. We want to ensure that our children are nourished. That's kind of the basic job. So that's always going to be something that parents consider very important. They'll know exactly what they should be doing, and then it's not happening in front of them in the reality. So that's a moment of tension. But I just think that that kind of gentle with yourself kind of idea is also really important here.
Absolutely. And this one stands out, I think, probably for a lot of people. I don't know if this happens in anybody else's house where they send the food into school for a trip and then it just comes home in the evening. You're like, oh, it's lovely to see you. I'm so glad that you've had a lovely day and nothing has been eaten. It's like, doesn't eat lunches at all. So, you know, like, should I just get rid of the lunch altogether and just let him eat when he comes home? Or should we just keep going with the lunchbox?
I think keep going with the lunchbox. It is about that exposure. I think maybe bringing the child into the you might have something to say about this as well, Colman. Just bringing the child into the choosing of the lunch. It depends on the age and making of the lunch. So sometimes that involvement can be like really important in terms of, you know, they might eat some bit of it because they've chosen it for themselves. That might not be exactly what you would want them to have, but it is a start in terms of having something in the middle of the day, which is really important as well.
Especially when they're learning. Should I make him eat it when he comes home?
You know, if they haven't had anything since breakfast,
or maybe just have something else to eat when you open the door.
Yeah, there's a social component to school lunches. You know, there's a status element of people comparing lunches.
Stats. Come on, hit me.
Status in terms of the social status.
Oh, really?
I mean, the idea of, and you know, it's kind of like following a very tricky formula, trying to not have any allergies in the lunchbox, not having any of this, not having any of that. There's kind of an idea of getting it right. And you're a little bit restricted in terms of what they will eat. Young people, like, there's a lot of schools that will say eat and then you can go outside. And young people have been sitting for hours, they just want to get outside. The eating is kind of superfluous at this stage. So they'll pretend to eat, and as soon as the first person's gone, when in actual fact, and I encourage in schools that there's a set eating time, and then, you know, the playtime is after. It's like, I don't know, in my house, when someone finishes a meal first and heads off, the rest of them now all of a sudden need to leave the table too. And so the idea of within a group in school, that can sometimes, there's a social pressure. So they may not be not eating for any nutritional or hunger value, but merely to get out to play.
Yeah, they've got places to be.
So from that point of view, you may ask a few questions around why they're leaving it. Is it about taste? Is it about preference? Is it about pressure? And many will say, I didn't have time. So it is important to consider that,
This is a great question as well. I think maybe a lot of parents maybe feel this. Any tips getting other caregivers on board? So i.e. my partner or grandparents. I've tried to talk to them before just in terms of the eating, but I was told I was very OTT.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think Aileen's point about asking for a kind of a buy-in rather than a wagging finger will get better response. you know, if you say, Nana, you're not allowed to give him any more, you'll just have Jaffa cakes being smuggled in pockets and things back from Nanas and things. So you just drive it underground.
Yeah.
But
So quickly.
but I think from the point of view of saying to whoever it is and saying, look, we're really trying to do something here as a family, and we're trying to get a bit healthier, and we're trying to do a bit of walking and that sort of stuff. And, you know, one treat is fine, but, you know, giving them the whole box of biscuits is probably not what we would like. And you know, the idea is that nobody wants to be an unpopular grandparent who says no, and nobody wants to be, you know, people say the great thing about having grandchildren is I can spoil them. But the idea of, you know, I suppose it's asking and requesting that somebody kind of just rows in with you a little bit if you're trying something. Because I think if you get into don't and, you know, giving out to people, nagging doesn't work as a strategy, you know, so from the point of view of getting people on board is far greater, you know. And again, these are things that you know, these are habits that you form over time. And as Aileen said, it takes 6 weeks, you know. For the first 3 or 4 visits, they're surprised they're not getting as many treats from Nana, but after 4 and 5, that's the treat that they get, you know.
Aileen, I thought an interesting question that came in there on Zoom as well is we touched on it very quickly before we move on to something else, but is about portion sizes. Is there, on Safe Food, is there actually like somewhere where you can go and visually see what portion sizes for what size child you have?
Yes,
give or take?
there is actually. So if you want to safefood.net, you will find them. Actually, I think we're going to put together some links related to the conversation tonight, so you'll get them afterwards as well. But the visual part is the essential thing. So I can tell you here in words, but actually online we have videos. Here is the very small child's portion. Here is the you know, the primary school child's portion, and here is the adult portion. And I think that's really useful to have a look at. A really good rule of thumb is for a 5-year-old, they need half the size that an adult needs, and you work up from that if they're older, you work down from that if they're younger. And for smaller kids, obviously the small plates, the small bowls, the small everything will help guide you again to, you know, getting the portions right. But remember, and sometimes parents think maybe the child, you mentioned it earlier, the child is not eating enough. Actually, the child may well be eating enough for their size. So just to remember that it's much smaller.
This is the tendency for the big plate.
Yeah,
do you
it's
know
the
when
big plate.
Or the big bowl, and then the pasta catches up quite quickly, and then you're like, well, you haven't had much. But you know, when you go to a restaurant and they put it in front of you, sometimes you're like, I can climb this. Like, I don't know how to eat it. Like.
But a serving of pasta for a very small child, you know, say 2 to 3, is a half a cup of cooked pasta.
Yeah.
So,
it's
you
not
know,
this.
no.
Yeah.
So I think when we start to remember that, I think that's really helpful.
That visual guidance you said.
Yeah.
And we'll put up all the links, but everything, obviously, you'll find it over in Safe Food. I'm going to jump over. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask at this point? Because feel free to jump in. Like, it's very much open. Yes.
How do you stop a child from grazing all day?
Okay, I mean, again, structure is hugely important, you know, so from the point of view...
She grazed from day one.
Yeah.
Nor said, oh, she'll grow out, but she never grew out, and she's 6.
So the question's about grazing.
The question's grazing. How do you stop a child grazing all day?
And again, what
Yeah, but she won't eat breakfast. Goes to school every day with no breakfast. Like, she doesn't need to be assessed for autism, but like, she'll just pick every half hour. Won't sit and finish one meal.
Yeah, again, I suppose all you can do in that situation is have those 3 meals set out, and then the grazing happens after the meal, not before it. Because if you can graze all day and you're getting a lunch at 1 o'clock and you've just grazed from 11 till 12, you're not going to have the hunger to have the lunch.
She's in school, but when she gets home from school or on a weekend, she's in the fridge every half hour.
Yeah, and again, I would say...
Put a breakfast, like, she won't eat breakfast any morning. No morning. Lunchtime, I'll say, right, we're having this for lunch. No, I don't eat that. I'm not hungry. But I'd put it there, but she'll ignore that and walk to the fridge.
Right, yeah, and again, I suppose I would leave a little space of time, maybe after the lunch or after the tea, before the grazing is allowed, you know, and again, from that point of view, what you're trying to do is regulate her appetite so that she gets hungry at the right time. And, you know, in terms of when we're trying to regulate children's appetite, there's a bit of work in that, you know, in terms of having the right amounts of food, like you're not overfeeding them so that they're not hungry for the next meal, and trying to get that right. And I think maybe if you didn't have breakfast, then you might be really hungry for lunch, and then take a break between lunch and the next one, and then you can graze once your meals are finished. But I wouldn't be, I suppose permissible grazing doesn't help you to kind of get those meals in place because they're already full from that point of view. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but she just seems like an endless pitch. She's always trying to back
Yeah, and again, I suppose the idea of...
I should literally be wrong, Brian, if I said, no, you have to wait. She would scream down.
I might just add to that. I think sometimes, you know, there's a big tendency to talk about the 3 meals. As adults, you know, we have our 3 meals. But for children, particularly young children, your daughter's only 6, actually it's 3 meals and 3 snacks. So these are small meals regularly for small stomachs that can't take a big volume of food. And I think what's more important, obviously you don't want her eating every half hour, but I think what's more important is the quality of the food. You know, is she eating snacks that are important for her nutritional benefit? Like, is it yogurt? Is it, you know, a cracker with a little bit of cheese or peanut butter? Is it some pieces of fruit? So what the snacks matter for a small child like that, and the quality of the snacks. Very small children can't afford to have lots of treats because it does nothing for them from a nutritional perspective, and it displaces those healthier snacks, which are really important for the child. So I think that's maybe even a more important question for you. What's the quality of the type of snacks that she's having? And again, just to see if you can space it out a little bit. But I mean, we're talking about, for a small child, it's nearly every kind of 3 hours it would be normal. You know, 2.5, 3 hours to be eating. So maybe you're a little bit more worried than, you know, when I tell you that it's 6 a day, it might be okay.
Even in terms of if you go over to Make a Start, because I know that when I started to work with safefood and I went on to Make a Start and I just looked at what the snacks were. Do you know, like I thought I was doing wonders. And then I looked at the snacks and went, no, that can't go. That has to go. You know, so even just that. I'm conscious of time as well, and I don't want to keep everybody here beyond. In terms of screen time and managing that, I know obviously things have been very different with children learning from home and now and finding the two, and just trying to figure that out as a parent. Is there, a quick do and don't that for navigating that, just from, I suppose, from safefood perspective and then from your perspective, Colman? Aileen, what would you think? So for me, like from a health perspective, the screen time is, what it does is displace their physical activity time. So it's all about making sure that they have an opportunity to be active, and the screen time takes away from that. So that would be the perspective that we would always look at it from. Now, because of COVID, all these lines have blurred. So children do quite a lot of their, let's call it useful work or school work, online now. So where's the line between the screen time that's school related or even, their clubs or whatever related, and then the leisure time? So that's a little bit more difficult to navigate, because we used to say no more than 2 hours for a primary school age child, but what does that mean now? So I think the main thing is that it's, on a weekday, they probably don't have more than an hour a day to manage. Probably you can give them a little bit more at the weekend, maybe the 2 hours, but just to make sure that it's not displacing their opportunity to be active. That's what we're talking about. Yeah. And Colman, from a parental side of things, it's that, like, you don't want to come in with that heavy hand either, going, I'm switching it off and changing the Wi-Fi code, or, and that you want them as they grow, because their lives are revolving around, being online and being on tablets, and like it'll ultimately, when they go to secondary school, as part of their schoolwork, you want to encourage that as well, but without, like, what can you give a young child ownership of that? I'm going to give you the next 15 minutes, or do you have to be the person who goes, this is the hard line? Or is it...
There's two sides to it. One, I think, is activity and movement, and to share Aileen's concerns there. We're seeing a lot more children with injuries. I'd never went to a physio when I was a child in my life, but there's physio friends who are seeing far more children. And that's because they're sitting and then they're going to training on a Tuesday night, intense exercise, and then stopping again. There's no natural movement. So we need to really encourage active movement into children's lives, where it's not all structured, scheduled, adult-led movement, but that they have movement within their day. The second side of it is, and it ties in with your diet, your technological diet is no different to your your food diet in many respects. There are good technology uses and poor ones. You know, so you have your kind of meat and 2 veg or whatever it is, and then you have treats afterwards. But, you know, nobody wants anyone to live a donutless life, but you don't have a donut before your breakfast, you know.
Yeah.
So the idea is,
No fortnight before half-eight.
when we're on technology, there's some of the stuff is useful.
Yeah.
You know, if I'm watching a YouTube tutorial learning how to play a song on a guitar, that's a useful use of my time, and that's not bad. Or, you know, if you were looking at it from a junk screen time point of view, whereas if I spend an hour and a half playing Candy Crush or watching cats on skateboards, maybe not the best use of my time. And so the idea is that you don't measure a child's diet by how long they sit at the table. You measure it by what they eat. And your technological diet is the same. So it's moving away from time spent and moving to time well spent.
Yeah.
So if children are using technology productively, that maybe is far better than somebody who's using less time but using it less productively. So it's more about, we're moving into kind of understanding what children are doing with technology as opposed to just a dashboard of time spent on it. Does that make sense?
It absolutely, totally makes sense. Last but not least, we've talked about portion size, but you kind of touched on exercise there as well. And I suppose depending on the age of your child and where they are in terms of their activities and getting them here and getting them there, and then they need to be somewhere else, and then they have this at this, and, you know, are they getting enough? Are they well grounded? You know, kids have more so probably than we ever did growing up, but you do want them to have exercise, and you do want them to have that social outlet away from their schooling and away from anything online. Is there a happy medium, or is there a guideline that you can go by with children in terms of their ages, that they're getting their exercise needs, but that we're not as parents maybe pushing them? Like, you know, I think sometimes as parents you get to Friday and you go, they're exhausted, and we still have to be up at 8:30 to be at a pitch at 9 o'clock for them to dance at, 1, and then they're looking at you like, at 6 o'clock on a Saturday evening, but we're trying to keep them as well-rounded as we can. Is there a guideline, Aileen, in terms of that?
So children need about an hour of physical activity every day, but that doesn't mean an
Right.
hour down at the GAA pitch or whatever it is. That means everything counts. So every bit of movement counts. So if they if they come home from school and go out into the garden for 10 minutes for a run around to kick a ball, that counts towards it. So it is the point that Colman, this natural movement within the course of the day is really important. They'll get some of that in the yard in school. They get some of that in their PE class in school. But they do need a bit more, whether that's going for a walk with you down to the park or whether it's an organised physical activity. So it'll be different for every child depending on what access they have, to being outdoors and all of that. But that's really an important part of it. And I think if there's one change you want to make, it's to be active as a family. Yeah. So we talked about food treats, but maybe a treat is that you all go together to whatever you have access to, whether that's the beach or the park or the mountain or the swimming pool, but something that you enjoy as a family together and is an active, something active that you can do together. That's really, really important.
As a wise child psychotherapist wouldn't tell me about being present in those moments, because that rewarding the treats become, we will go to X, Y, and Z, and that instead of you can have a premiership set of stickers on Friday, or that they build to that, and incorporating that exercise and that activity, but making that kind of normal part of the course, rather than it being this big, we're going to Centre Parks for 4 days, but just more, we're going to the park, and that it becomes.
And remember, what you do is really important as well. So if you are being active and they see you being active, if you're having your glass of water with dinner, if you are not having, all of this matters. If you can see it, you can be it. That there's a lot of truth to that. So what the parent does and what the parent does with the children is equally important.
We're getting involved.
Yeah, I remember asking a teenager for older children, what is the difference between nagging and encouraging? And they gave me this great explanation. Nagging is you never go outside and you never walk. Encouraging is, come on, we'll go down to the shop, I'll go with you. And there's a vast difference in being told to do something and being asked to do something. And the idea of you never, you shouldn't, you've been sitting there too long, that's not going to encourage any young person to get up. Whereas if you say, can you finish that in 15 minutes, and yourself and myself will go down and we'll get this and do, you started by going with them. That's how you start the habit. Rather than saying you never, you don't, you should, which was only going to make that child or teenager sit for longer, unfortunately.
Absolutely. But again, I think maybe, I don't know if you guys agree, that we're becoming newer products of what our parents perhaps were, that we're living our lifestyle. And I've learned a lot from you just in terms of language that we use. And Make a Start very much comes into that in the campaign. It's making those really small changes, that we're not jumping into the unknown. We're realising that it's this marathon, but the ultimate goal is going to be very good. And it is ultimately all about your well-being and your happiness and the healthiness of your kids. And, you know, if you can get through all those little bits and you get to the end where, you know, there's a moment somewhere in it where you're in a park and for 4 minutes, everybody's happy. You know, it's not going to be like that all of the time, and there will always be the challenges that come with it, but that you kind of learn a little bit more, like you were saying about the language, and then about, you know, facing the bit of adversity and trying to navigate that. But they just become, as a parent, when you get the sweet spot, even if it's for 2 minutes, it's definitely all worth it.
Absolutely.
Guys, thank you so much for joining us. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much to everybody for joining us and for joining us online. If you registered online, you can watch everything back, as always. And we really, really appreciate your time this evening, guys. Thank you very much.
Pleasure, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.